Tycoon returns to find his ex-wife with twin boys he never knew existed after his abandonment. As he pulled into the driveway of his childhood home, now a shadow of its former grandeur, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. The manicured lawns had grown wild, the paint peeling from the shutters, a visual representation of the life he'd left behind. Sebastian stepped out of the car, his designer shoes crunching on the gravel. He paused, taking in the scene before him, his heart racing with a mixture of dread and something else he couldn't quite name. Nostalgia? Regret? The emotions swirled within him, threatening to overwhelm his carefully constructed facade. As he approached the front door, memories flooded back, happy childhood moments intertwined with the bitter taste of his last day here. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of movement inside. His throat tightened. "Come on, Seb. You've faced down boardrooms and cutthroat negotiations. This is just home," he muttered to himself, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Finally, he rapped on the door. The sound echoed in the quiet neighborhood, seeming to reverberate through time itself. Footsteps approached from inside, and Sebastian felt his pulse quicken. The door creaked open, revealing a face he hadn't seen in half a decade, his mother's. Her eyes widened in shock, a gasp escaping her lips. "Sebastian?" she whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope. "Hello, Mom," Sebastian replied, his usual confidence faltering. I'm back." The silence that followed was deafening. Years of absence, of unanswered calls and returned letters, hung between them like an invisible wall. His mother's eyes, once so full of pride for her successful son, now held a weariness that pierced Sebastian to his core. She stepped back, wordlessly inviting him in. As Sebastian crossed the threshold, the familiar scent of home hit him, a poignant reminder of all he'd left behind. His gaze swept across the living room, noting the changes, the empty spaces where his presence had once been celebrated. "Why now, Sebastian?" his mother finally asked, her voice steady but laced with years of hurt. "After all this time, why come back now?" Sebastian turned to face her, the practiced excuses dying on his lips. In that moment, looking into his mother's eyes, the true weight of his actions crashed down upon him. The empire he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, it all seemed hollow in the face of what he'd lost. I don't know, Mom," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I finally realized what really matters." As the words left his mouth, Sebastian felt a crack in the armor he'd built around himself. Unknown to him, this moment of this admission was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, family, and redemption. Little did Sebastian know that across town, in a modest apartment, a woman named Victoria was putting two young boys to bed, twin boys whose existence would soon turn his world upside down. "You're never here, Sebastian," Victoria's voice echoed in his mind, sharp with frustration and hurt. "It's always one more deal, one more meeting. When will we matter as much as your precious company?" Sebastian could see her now, standing in their luxurious penthouse, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He remembered how he'd dismissed her concerns, too caught up in his own ambitions to see the damage he was causing. "You don't understand, Vic," his past self argued, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This deal could set us up for life. A few more months, that's all I need." Victoria's laugh was bitter, cutting through the tension. "A few more months? That's what you said last year and the year before that. I can't do this anymore, Seb. I won't." The memory shifted, and Sebastian felt the phantom sting of the champagne flute shattering against the wall beside his head. Victoria's aim had always been impeccable. "Get out!" she had screamed, her voice breaking. "If your work means so much to you, then go. Don't come back until you figure out what really matters." Back in the present, Sebastian stumbled, catching himself on the back of a chair. His mother rushed to his side, concern etched on her face. "Sebastian, are you all right?" He blinked, trying to shake off the vivid flashback. "I'm fine, Mom. Just remembering." His mother's eyes softened with understanding. "Victoria?" she asked gently. Sebastian nodded, unable to speak. The guilt he'd suppressed for years bubbled up, threatening to choke him. "I really messed up, didn't I?" he whispered, more to himself than to his mother. She placed a comforting hand on his arm. "We all make mistakes, Sebastian. The question is, what are you going to do now?" As Sebastian struggled to find an answer, across town, Victoria tucked the blanket around her sleeping sons. She brushed a stray lock of hair from Lucas's forehead, her heart swelling with love and a tinge of sadness. "Your daddy would be so proud of you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She'd said them every night for years, a ritual born of hope and heartache. But tonight, something felt different. A shiver ran down her spine, an inexplicable feeling that change was in the air. Victoria shook it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. As she closed the boys' bedroom door, her gaze fell on the unopened envelope on the kitchen counter. The return address was from a law firm she didn't recognize. With trembling hands, she reached for it, her instincts screaming that its contents would shatter the fragile peace she'd built. Little did Victoria know, as she slowly tore open the envelope, that across town, the man she'd once loved and lost was grappling with the ghosts of his past, setting in motion a chain of events that would intertwine their lives once more. The stage was set, the players, unaware of the roles they were about to play in a drama of reconciliation, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As the night deepened, Millbrook held its breath, waiting for the dawn that would bring with it a storm of emotions and revelations. The room began to spin. Victoria stumbled to the couch, collapsing onto it as the weight of the news threatened to crush her. Memories of the past 5 years flooded her mind, the grueling pregnancy, the sleepless nights, the constant struggle to make ends meet. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "No, no, no. This can't be happening." She glanced at the twins' bedroom door, her protective instincts flaring. Lucas and Liam, her beautiful boys, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. Victoria's mind raced back to those early days, when the joy of impending motherhood was overshadowed by crushing loneliness and fear. 2 weeks after Sebastian left, Victoria sat on the cold tile of their bathroom floor, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her shaking hands. "This can't be real," she muttered, tears streaming down her face. "How am I supposed to do this alone?" The following months were a blur of doctor's appointments, mounting bills, and endless nights of worry. Victoria remembered the day she first heard 2 distinct heartbeats during an ultrasound. "Congratulations," the technician had said, smiling. "You're having twins." Victoria's elation had been short-lived, quickly replaced by panic. "Twins?" she'd echoed, her voice hollow. I don't know if I can." Back in the present, Victoria wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. She looked around the small apartment, filled with evidence of the life she'd built for her boys, crayon drawings on the fridge, tiny shoes by the door, a stack of children's books on the coffee table. "We've come so far," she whispered, her resolve strengthening. "I won't let him waltz back in and destroy everything." Just then, a small voice called out from the bedroom. "Mommy!" Victoria quickly composed herself, tucking the letter under a cushion. She plastered on a smile and went to check on her son. Liam was sitting up in bed, his dark curls tousled from sleep. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled, reaching out for her. Victoria gathered him in her arms, breathing in his familiar scent. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. It was just a dream." As she held her son, rocking him gently back to sleep, Victoria's mind whirled with the implications of the letter. Sebastian knew. After all this time, he knew about the boys. What would he do? What could she do to protect her children from the man who had abandoned them before they were even born? Across town, oblivious to the turmoil he had set in motion, Sebastian tossed and turned in his childhood bedroom. His dreams were plagued by fractured memories and imagined scenarios, Victoria's face contorted in pain. The cries of infants he'd never met, a future he'd thrown away. As dawn broke over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, Both Sebastian and Victoria lay awake, each grappling with the knowledge that their carefully constructed worlds were about to collide. The coming days would test them in ways they could never have imagined, forcing them to confront the past and fight for a future neither of them had dared to envision. The stage was set for a reunion that would shake the foundations of their lives, with two innocent boys caught in the middle of a storm 5 years in the making. "Mommy, can we go to the park today?" Lucas asked, his mouth full of cereal. Victoria smiled, pushing her worries aside for a moment. "Of course, sweetie. But first, let's finish breakfast and get you both dressed." As she helped the boys clean up, Liam tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, why don't we have a daddy like Tommy from school?" The innocent question hit Victoria like a punch to the gut. She knelt down, looking into Liam's curious eyes, so much like Sebastian's that it made her heart ache. "Well, honey," she began, choosing her words carefully, "every family is different. Some have a mommy and a daddy, some have two mommies or two daddies, and some, like us, just have a mommy." "But why?" Lucas chimed in, his brow furrowed. "Did our daddy not want us?" Victoria felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She pulled both boys into a tight hug. "Your daddy, he had to go away before you were born, but that doesn't mean he didn't want you. Sometimes grown-ups make complicated decisions." "Will we ever meet him?" Liam asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Victoria's mind flashed to the letter hidden in the living room. I don't know, sweetie, but what I do know is that I love you both more than anything in the world." As they got ready for the park, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling of impending change. She watched her boys play, their laughter echoing across the playground, and wondered how Sebastian's return would affect their innocent world. Across town, Sebastian sat in a local cafe, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His eyes were fixed on his phone, scrolling through years of missed notifications and ignored messages. One name kept appearing: Victoria. His finger hovered over her contact information. Should he call? What would he even say after all this time? A group of young children ran past his table, their excited chatter pulling him from his thoughts. He watched them, imagining what his own children might look like, sound like. The realization that he had missed so much hit him with renewed force. "Excuse me." A voice interrupted his reverie. Sebastian looked up to see an older man standing by his table. "Aren't you Sebastian Reeves?" Sebastian nodded, bracing himself for the usual mix of admiration and envy his success often inspired. But the man's next words caught him off guard. "I remember when you used to mow my lawn as a teenager," the man said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "Your father would be surprised to see how you turned out." Before Sebastian could respond, the man walked away, leaving him with a fresh wave of shame. He looked back at his phone, at Victoria's name on the screen. "I have to make this right," he murmured to himself, finally pressing the call button. Back at the park, Victoria felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. She pulled it out, her breath catching as she saw the name on the screen. Sebastian. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The sounds of the playground faded away, and Victoria found herself transported back to happier times. Stolen kisses, shared dreams, promises of forever. But as quickly as the nostalgia came, it was replaced by anger and fear. How dare he call now after all this time? Her thumb hovered over the screen, torn between answering and blocking the number forever. In the distance, she heard Lucas call out, "Mommy, watch this." Victoria looked up, seeing her son perched at the top of the slide, a wide grin on his face. In that moment, she made her decision. With a deep breath, she answered the call. "Sebastian," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk." The park around her continued its lively bustle, oblivious to the life-altering conversation about to unfold. As Victoria braced herself for whatever came next, she watched her boys play, determined to protect the life she had built for them, no matter the cost. "I appreciate you meeting me, Mark," Sebastian began, his voice low and uncertain. "It's been a while." Mark leaned back, his eyes scrutinizing Sebastian with a mix of curiosity and wariness. 5 years, to be exact. "You've missed a lot, Seb," Sebastian nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his untouched wine glass. I know. I'm starting to realize just how much. A heavy silence fell between them, years of unspoken words and missed milestones hanging in the air. Sebastian cleared his throat, steeling himself for what he needed to ask. Mark, I need to know. How is she? How's Victoria? Mark's expression hardened, a flicker of protective anger flashing in his eyes. Why do you care now, Sebastian? You walked away. You left her when she needed you most. Sebastian flinched at the accusation, deserved as it was. I made a mistake, Mark. A huge one. I'm trying to make things right. Mark scoffed, shaking his head. Make things right? Do you have any idea what she's been through? As Mark spoke, Sebastian's world tilted on its axis. Each word felt like a physical blow, revealing the depth of his ignorance and the magnitude of his abandonment. She was pregnant, Seb twins. Did you know that? Sebastian's face drained of color, his hands gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. What? He stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark's eyes widened in realization. You didn't know, he breathed. Oh God, Seb, you really didn't know. The restaurant around them faded away as Sebastian's mind reeled with the implications. Twins. He had children. 2 of them. The room seemed to spin, and he struggled to catch his breath. How old? Sebastian managed to ask, his voice cracking. They turned 4 last month, Mark replied, his tone softening slightly at Sebastian's obvious shock. Lucas and Liam. They're good kids. Seb, Victoria's done an amazing job. Considering. Sebastian's heart clenched at the names of his sons. Names he should have known. Birthdays he should have celebrated. The weight of his absence crashed down upon him with crushing force. I need to see them, Sebastian said suddenly, half rising from his seat. I need to talk to Victoria, to explain, to... Mark's hand shot out, gripping Sebastian's arm. Slow down, Seb. You can't just barge back into their lives. Victoria's worked hard to build a stable life for those boys. You showing up out of the blue could turn everything upside down. Sebastian sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. What have I done, Mark? He whispered, his voice thick with regret. How could I have been so blind? As Sebastian grappled with the life-altering revelation, across town, Victoria sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the phone in her hands. The brief conversation with Sebastian replayed in her mind. We need to meet, Victoria. There's so much I need to say. I don't know if that's a good idea, Sebastian. It's been 5 years. Please. I know about the boys. I want to make things right. Victoria's heart raced at the memory of his words. He knew. Somehow he knew. And now he wanted back in their lives. She glanced at the framed photo on her nightstand. Lucas and Liam on their 4th birthday. Their smiles wide and carefree. Could she risk their happiness, their stability, by allowing Sebastian back into their world? As the night deepened, both Sebastian and Victoria lay awake, separated by miles and years of hurt, yet connected by the 2 innocent lives that hung in the balance. The decisions they would make in the coming days would reshape not just their own futures, but those of Lucas and Liam as well. The stage was set for a confrontation years in the making, with the fate of a family hanging by a thread. As Millbrook slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in its midst, Sebastian and Victoria prepared themselves for a reunion that would change everything. His phone buzzed, Victoria's name flashing on the screen. With a shaky hand, he answered, Victoria? Sebastian. Her voice was taut, controlled. We need to talk. In person. His heart raced. Yes, of course. Where? The coffee shop on Main Street. 1 hour. The line went dead before he could respond. Sebastian stared at the phone, a mix of anticipation and dread coursing through him. An hour later, Sebastian found himself seated at a corner table in the bustling coffee shop, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. The bell above the door chimed, and he looked up to see Victoria enter. His breath caught in his throat. She was just as beautiful, as he remembered, perhaps even more so, but there was a hardness to her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. As she approached, Sebastian stood, unsure of how to greet her. "Victoria, She held up a hand, silencing him as she took her seat. "Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. Those boys are my whole world. I've spent the last 5 years protecting them, nurturing them, being both mother and father. If you think you can just waltz back into our lives—" No, Sebastian interrupted, his voice pleading. "I know I have no right. I want to make things right. Somehow." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. "Make things right? Do you have any idea what it was like, Sebastian? Finding out I was pregnant after you'd gone? Wondering every day if you'd come back, if you'd even care." Sebastian felt the weight of her words like physical blows. "I'm so sorry, Victoria. If I had known—" "You would have what?" she challenged. "Stayed out of obligation? We both know that's not who you are." The truth of her words stung, but Sebastian pressed on. "I've changed, Victoria. These past 5 years. They've shown me what really matters. Please, just give me a chance to prove it." Victoria studied him, her expression unreadable. "And what about Lucas and Liam? Have you thought about how this might affect them? They don't even know you exist." Sebastian's heart clenched at the mention of his sons' names. "I want to know them, Victoria. I want to be a part of their lives. Please." For a moment, Victoria's stern facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the vulnerability beneath. "I don't know if I can trust you, Sebastian. Not with their hearts. Not with mine." Sebastian leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance. Just one chance to show you I'm not the same man who left 5 years ago." Victoria was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in her eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think. This isn't just about us anymore." Sebastian nodded, hope and fear warring within him. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere this time." As Victoria stood to leave, Sebastian called out, "Victoria? What are they like? Lucas and Liam?" She paused, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth despite herself. "They're amazing. Smart, funny, kind. Lucas is always lost in his books. And Liam, he has your eyes." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sebastian alone with the bittersweet knowledge of the children he had yet to meet. As the coffee shop bustled around him, Sebastian sat motionless, overwhelmed by the enormity of what lay ahead. He had a chance, a small one, but a chance nonetheless to right the wrongs of his past. But as he contemplated the road ahead, one question loomed larger than all others. Could he truly be the father that Lucas and Liam deserved? The answer to that question would shape not only his future but the lives of 2 innocent boys who had no idea their world was about to change forever. As Sebastian left the coffee shop, stepping into the bright Millbrook morning, he steeled himself for the most important challenge of his life, becoming the man his family needed him to be. "Mommy?" Liam yawned, his dark curls splayed across the pillow. "Will you tell us about Daddy again?" Victoria froze, her hand hovering over the light switch. She turned, forcing a smile. "What would you like to know, sweetheart?" Lucas sat up, his eyes bright with curiosity. Was he tall? Did he like to read like me? The questions, once hypothetical, now carried the weight of reality. Victoria perched on the edge of Liam's bed, her heart racing. Yes, he was tall, and he was very smart. He loved to learn new things. "Do you think he misses us?" Liam asked, his voice small and uncertain. Victoria's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. "I'm sure he thinks about you both very much," she managed, the half-truth burning her tongue. As she kissed them goodnight and retreated to the living room, Victoria's mind was in turmoil. The boys' innocence, their longing for a father figure, clashed violently with her instinct to protect them from potential heartbreak. She pulled out her phone, staring at Sebastian's number. Her finger hovered over the call button, trembling with indecision. Just as she was about to press it, a knock at the door startled her. Heart-pounding, Victoria approached the door. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar face mark, her closest friend and confidant since Sebastian's departure. "Mark," she breathed, opening the door. "What are you doing here so late?" He stepped inside, his expression grave. "We need to talk, Vic. It's about Sebastian." Victoria's stomach dropped. "What about him?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "I ran into him at the park today. He was watching the boys play from a distance. Vic, I've never seen him like this. He looked broken." Victoria sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly weak. "I don't know what to do, Mark. He wants to be in their lives. But how can I trust him? How do I know he won't leave again?" Mark sat beside her, his voice gentle. "I can't tell you what to do, Vic. But I will say this, the Sebastian I saw today is not the same man who left 5 years ago. He's changed." Victoria buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed. But what if it's not enough? What if letting him in only hurts the boys in the long run? Mark placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "That's a risk you'll have to weigh. But Vic, those boys deserve to know their father. And Sebastian, he deserves a chance to make things right." As Mark left, his words echoing in her mind, Victoria found herself at a crossroads. The safe, familiar path of single motherhood stretched out before her, contrasted sharply with the uncertain, potentially treacherous road of allowing Sebastian back into their lives. She walked to the boys' room, quietly opening the door. Lucas and Liam slept peacefully, unaware of the monumental decision hanging in the balance. Victoria watched them, her heart swelling with love and fear in equal measure. In that moment, staring at the faces of her sleeping children, Victoria made her choice. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Sebastian. "The boys have a soccer game tomorrow at 4. Millbrook Community Park. If you want to see them, be there. But stay in the background. They're not ready to meet you yet." As she hit send, a mix of relief and apprehension washed over her. For better or worse, the wheels were in motion. Tomorrow would be the first step on a journey that could redefine their family forever. Across town, Sebastian's phone buzzed with the incoming message. As he read Victoria's words, a surge of hope and terror coursed through him. Tomorrow he would see his sons for the first time, not just from a distance, but up close in the flesh. As both Victoria and Sebastian lay awake that night, their minds raced with the possibilities and pitfalls that lay ahead. The dawn would bring a new chapter in their intertwined stories, one filled with the potential for healing, heartbreak, and the redefinition of what it means to be a family. He felt his breath catch in his throat. They were perfect. Lucas, slightly taller, moved with a determined grace, while Liam's infectious grin flashed as he chased after the ball. Sebastian's vision blurred with unshed tears as he watched his sons play, oblivious to his presence. From across the field, Victoria caught sight of Sebastian. She tensed, her protective instincts flaring. But as she observed him from afar, she couldn't help but notice the raw emotion etched across his face. This wasn't the confident, ambitious man who had left her 5 years ago. This was a man utterly transformed by the sight of his children. As the game progressed, Sebastian found himself unconsciously edging closer to the sidelines. He cheered silently when Lucas scored a goal, his heart swelling with pride. When Liam took a tumble and quickly bounced back up, Sebastian had to physically restrain himself from rushing onto the field to check on him. The final whistle blew, and the children swarmed their parents. Sebastian watched, a bittersweet ache in his chest, as Victoria gathered the boys in her arms, praising their efforts. He was about to turn and leave when he heard a small voice pipe up. "Mommy, who's that man watching us?" Sebastian froze. Liam's observant eyes had spotted him. He looked to Victoria, panic rising in his throat. Their eyes met across the field, a silent communication passing between them. Victoria hesitated for a moment before kneeling down to the boy's level. "That's an old friend of Mommy's. Would you like to meet him?" Sebastian's heart raced as Victoria slowly led the boys towards him. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, trying to compose himself. As they approached, he could see his own features reflected in their small faces, Lucas's determined jaw, Liam's expressive eyes. Boys, Victoria said softly, her voice trembling slightly. This is Sebastian. He's someone very special to Mommy. Sebastian knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with his sons. Hello, Lucas. Hello, Liam, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. You both played amazingly out there. Lucas regarded him curiously. Do you like soccer too? Sebastian nodded, a small smile breaking through his nervousness. I do. I used to play when I was your age. Liam, always the more outgoing of the two, piped up. Can you show us some tricks sometime? The innocent request hit Sebastian like a tidal wave of longing and regret. He looked up at Victoria, seeking permission. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I'd love to, Sebastian replied, his voice barely above a whisper. If that's okay with your mom. Victoria cleared her throat, her eyes shining with unshed tears. We'll see. For now, why don't you boys go get your gear? We need to head home for dinner. As the twins scampered off, Sebastian stood, facing Victoria. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. Thank you, he said simply, his voice raw. They're incredible, Victoria. You've done an amazing job. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. They are. And yes, I have. She paused, conflict evident in her eyes. Sebastian, this doesn't change everything. We still have a lot to work through. He nodded solemnly. I know, but it's a start, isn't it? Please, Victoria, let me be a part of their lives. I'll do whatever it takes. Before she could respond, Lucas and Liam came bounding back, soccer balls in tow. Mommy, can Sebastian come over for dinner sometime? Lucas asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Victoria and Sebastian exchanged a loaded glance. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, a potential turning point in all their lives. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice soft but firm. We'll see, sweetie. For now, let's say goodbye to Sebastian. We'll talk more about this later. As the boys waved goodbye, their innocent smiles tugging at Sebastian's heartstrings, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a chance, a fragile, precious chance to build something new from the ashes of what he'd left behind. Watching Victoria lead the twins away, Sebastian made a silent vow. He would prove himself worthy of this second chance, no matter what it took. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time in years, Sebastian felt the stirring of true purpose in his soul. As the sun set over Millbrook Community Park, casting long shadows across the now-empty soccer field, the first tenuous threads of a new family narrative began to weave themselves together, fragile but full of potential. One crisp autumn morning, Sebastian found himself pacing outside, the offices of Millbrook's most prominent family law firm. His stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread as he waited for Victoria to arrive. Today, they would begin the formal process of establishing his parental rights and visitation schedule. As Victoria's car pulled into the parking lot, Sebastian's heart rate spiked. She emerged, her face a mask of determined composure, but he could see the strain in the set of her shoulders. Victoria, he greeted her softly as she approached. Thank you for agreeing to this. She nodded curtly, her eyes meeting his briefly before darting away. Let's just get this over with, Sebastian. The boys are with my mother, and I need to get back to them. Inside the office, they sat across from each other, the polished mahogany desk between them feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. Their lawyer, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, spread out a series of documents before them. Now, Sarah began, her tone professional yet gentle. We're here to discuss the terms of Mr. Reeves' visitation rights and potential shared custody arrangement. Ms. Henderson, you've expressed some concerns. Would you like to start? Victoria took a deep breath, her fingers twisting in her lap. Yes, I'm worried about the impact on the boys. They've only just met Sebastian. Suddenly having him as a regular part of their lives. It's a big change. Sebastian leaned forward, his voice earnest. I understand that, Victoria. I don't want to disrupt their lives. I just want a chance to be their father, to be there for them in ways I should have been from the beginning. Sarah nodded, making notes. Mr. Reeves, are you prepared to commit to regular visitation schedules, child support payments, and involvement in the boys' education and extracurricular activities? Absolutely, Sebastian replied without hesitation. Whatever it takes. I've already started looking at houses in the area to be closer to them. Victoria's head snapped up, surprise evident in her eyes. You're moving back to Millbrook? What about your company? Sebastian met her gaze steadily. I'm delegating more responsibilities to my team. The company can run without me being there every day. This, he gestured between them, is more important. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, or the faintest hint of softening, crossed Victoria's face. But it was quickly replaced by her usual guarded expression. That's commendable, she said carefully. But Sebastian, you have to understand. You can't just waltz back in and expect everything to be perfect. The boys have a routine, a life, and I've worked so hard to give them stability. Sebastian nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I know, Victoria, and I'm not trying to disrupt that. I want to enhance their lives, not complicate them. Please, just give me a chance to prove I can be the father they deserve. Sarah interjected gently. Perhaps we could start with a gradual introduction? Supervised visits, increasing in frequency and duration over time. Victoria hesitated, conflict evident in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. I think that could work. But Sebastian? She locked eyes with him, her gaze intense. If this becomes too much for the boys, if I see any sign that it's negatively affecting them, we pull back. Agreed. Agreed, Sebastian said solemnly. Their well-being comes first. Always. As Sarah began outlining the details of their agreement, Sebastian felt a mix of emotions churning within him. Hope, fear, excitement, and a deep, aching love for the sons he was just beginning to know. He glanced at Victoria, seeing the same tumult reflected in her eyes. This was just the beginning of a long, challenging journey. There would be missteps, disagreements, and moments of doubt. But as they signed the preliminary documents, Sebastian felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd experienced in years. Outside the office, as they prepared to part ways, Sebastian spoke softly. Thank you, Victoria, for giving me this chance. I won't let you down. I won't let them down. Victoria paused, her hand on her car door. For a moment, her guard dropped, and Sebastian saw a glimpse of the woman he'd once loved, and perhaps never stopped loving. Just be there for them, Sebastian. That's all they need. That's all any child needs. As Victoria drove away, Sebastian stood in the parking lot, the weight of responsibility and the glimmer of hope equally heavy on his shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The autumn breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the promise of change. In Millbrook, a family fractured by past mistakes was taking its first tentative steps towards healing, each day bringing new challenges and new possibilities for redemption. His hands trembled as he heard Victoria's car pull into the driveway. Through the window, he could see Lucas and Liam bouncing excitedly in their seats, while Victoria's face remained carefully neutral. Remember, he whispered to himself, take it slow, don't push too hard. The doorbell rang, and Sebastian took a deep breath before opening it. The twins burst in with boundless energy, their eyes wide with curiosity. Wow, is this your house? Liam exclaimed, spinning around to take in everything. Lucas, ever the more observant one, noticed the beanbags immediately. Look, Liam, they're just like the ones we wanted. Sebastian caught Victoria's eye, seeking approval. She gave a slight nod, though her posture remained tense as she settled into an armchair near the window, close enough to observe, far enough to give them space. I thought we could build something together today, Sebastian suggested, gesturing toward the coffee table where he'd laid out several Lego sets. If you'd like. The boys' faces lit up, but then Lucas hesitated, glancing at his mother. Can we, Mom? Victoria forced a smile. Of course, sweetie. That's why we're here. As they settled around the coffee table, Sebastian felt his heart constrict at how naturally the boys fell into a rhythm together, Lucas methodically sorting pieces, while Liam enthusiastically dived into construction. It was a dynamic he should have known from birth. "You're doing it wrong," Lucas suddenly said to his brother, reaching for a piece Liam had just placed. "No, I'm not," Liam protested, pulling away. Sebastian felt panic rise in his chest, their first conflict under his watch. He glanced at Victoria, who was already half rising from her chair, but then took a deep breath and spoke gently. "Hey guys, why don't we look at the instructions together? Sometimes there's more than one way to build something." The boys paused, considering his words. To Sebastian's relief, they scooted closer to look at the manual he held out. "See," he continued, pointing to the diagram. "Lucas is right about where that piece eventually goes, but Liam's idea could work too if we adjust these other parts. What do you think?" The twins exchanged looks, then nodded. "Can we try both ways?" Lucas asked. "Of course." Sebastian smiled, his heart swelling. That's what makes building fun. Experimenting and finding what works best. From her corner, Victoria watched the interaction with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. The ease with which Sebastian handled the situation surprised her, as did the natural way the boys seemed to respond to him. As the morning progressed, the tension in the room gradually eased. The sound of Lego pieces clicking together mingled with laughter and excited chatter. Sebastian found himself learning his sons' personalities through their play, Lucas's methodical approach, Liam's creative spontaneity. "Look, Mom!" Liam called out proudly, holding up their completed creation. "Sebastian helped us make it even better than the picture." Victoria moved closer, examining their work. "It's wonderful, sweetheart. Both of you did a great job. Can we come back and build more stuff?" Lucas asked, looking between his mother and Sebastian with hopeful eyes. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sebastian held his breath, waiting for Victoria's response. Victoria hesitated, then softened slightly at the eager expressions on her sons' faces. "We'll see. Maybe next weekend, if everything goes well this week." Sebastian caught her eye, mouthing a silent thank you. She acknowledged it with a slight nod, but he could see the conflict still warring behind her eyes. As they prepared to leave, Sebastian knelt down to the boys' level. "Thank you for coming today. I had a wonderful time building with you both." "Me too," Liam exclaimed, unexpectedly throwing his arms around Sebastian's neck. The hug caught Sebastian off guard, and he felt tears prick at his eyes as he gently returned the embrace. Lucas, after a moment's hesitation, joined in. Victoria watched the scene unfold, her own eyes growing misty. For all her fears and reservations, she couldn't deny the genuine connection forming between Sebastian and their sons. As they walked to the car, Lucas turned back. "Bye, Sebastian. Don't forget about next weekend." "I won't," Sebastian promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forget again." Standing in his doorway, watching the car disappear down the street, Sebastian felt a mixture of joy and ache in his chest. One visit down, countless more to go. Each one a step toward healing, toward becoming the father his sons deserved. Inside the car, Victoria glanced in the rearview mirror at her chattering boys, their excitement palpable. Despite her lingering doubts, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, this could work after all. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the street, marking the end of a morning that felt like both an ending and a beginning, the first real step toward redefining what family meant for all of them. "Did you hear? Sebastian Reeves is back. Can you believe he abandoned his pregnant wife? Those poor boys." The whispers followed him down every aisle, each one cutting deeper than the last. At the checkout counter, he encountered Mrs. Patterson, his former high school teacher and one of the town's most respected residents. "Sebastian," she said coolly, her disapproval evident in every syllable. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you back in Millbrook after everything." Sebastian gripped his shopping cart tighter, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Mrs. Patterson, I know I made terrible mistakes. I'm trying to make things right." She raised an eyebrow. Make things right? Some things can't be fixed with money and grand gestures, Sebastian. Those boys have grown up without a father. Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Leave him alone, Martha. Mark stepped forward, positioning himself beside Sebastian. The gesture of support, though unexpected, meant more than Sebastian could express. He's here now, Mark continued, his voice firm. That's what matters. As they left the store together, Sebastian turned to his old friend. Thank you, Mark. You didn't have to do that. Mark shook his head. Look, Seb, what you did was wrong. We both know that. But I've seen you with the boys. I've seen how hard you're trying. This town. They love their gossip, but they also believe in redemption. You just have to prove yourself worthy of it. Later that afternoon, Sebastian sat in his car outside the twin school, waiting for their soccer practice to end. Victoria had reluctantly agreed to let him pick them up, another small step forward in their evolving arrangement. As he watched the children file out of the building, he overheard two mothers talking nearby. That's him, the father who abandoned Victoria. How dare he show his face here now? Sebastian's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but then he saw Lucas and Liam emerging from the school, their faces lighting up as they spotted his car. Their joy made everything else fade into background noise. Sebastian! They called out in unison, running toward him. As they approached, another parent stepped forward, blocking their path. Boys, are you sure you should be going with him? Where's your mother? Lucas looked confused, but Liam spoke up confidently. Mom said it's okay. Sebastian's our dad. The simple declaration, spoken with such innocent certainty, brought tears to Sebastian's eyes. The parent stepped back, chastened by the pure acceptance in Liam's voice. During the drive home, Lucas suddenly asked, Sebastian, why do people look at you funny? Sebastian's heart clenched. He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting his son's questioning gaze. Well, buddy, sometimes when grown-ups make mistakes, other people take a while to forgive them. What mistakes? Liam piped up from the back seat. Sebastian took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. The biggest mistake I ever made was not being here for you both. For your mom. But I'm trying to fix that now. A moment of silence filled the car before Lucas spoke again. Mom says everyone deserves a second chance if they're really sorry. Sebastian blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom in his son's words. Your mom is a very wise person. As they pulled up to Victoria's house, she was waiting on the porch. Sebastian could see the tension in her posture ease slightly when she saw the boys' happy faces. Mom! Liam called out as they tumbled from the car. Can Sebastian stay for dinner? Please. Victoria hesitated, looking between her son's hopeful faces and Sebastian's carefully neutral expression. Finally, she nodded. Just for tonight. As they walked toward the house, Sebastian felt a small hand slip into his. Looking down, he saw Lucas smiling up at him. In that moment, he knew that all the judgment, all the whispers, all the disapproving looks were worth enduring for the chance to be part of his son's lives. The autumn evening settled around them, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. In Millbrook, opinions might be slow to change, but with each passing day, Sebastian was proving that sometimes, the prodigal son could indeed return home and find redemption in the eyes of those who mattered most. Can I help? Sebastian asked, hovering uncertainly in the kitchen doorway. Victoria hesitated, then nodded toward the vegetables. You can chop those, if you still remember how. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Some things you don't forget. He picked up the knife, falling into the familiar rhythm they'd once shared in their own kitchen years ago. The boys sat at the counter, doing their homework, occasionally glancing up to watch their parents move around each other in a careful dance of proximity and distance. Mom! Lucas called out. Sebastian's doing it wrong. You always cut the carrots in stars. Victoria froze, the memory hitting her hard. She'd started cutting vegetables into shapes when the boys were toddlers, trying to make healthy food more appealing. Sebastian looked between them, then set down his knife. Show me? Victoria found herself moving closer, her hands trembling slightly as she demonstrated the technique. "Like this?" she murmured, aware of his presence behind her, of the familiar scent of his cologne. "I remember when you used to do this for me," Sebastian said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was working late, you'd leave dinner with little shapes hidden throughout." Their eyes met briefly, the shared memory hanging between them. Victoria quickly looked away, but not before Sebastian caught the glimmer of tears in her eyes. "Mommy, are you sad?" Liam asked, ever perceptive to his mother's emotions. Victoria wiped her eyes quickly. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just remember things that make them feel a lot of feelings at once." Sebastian stepped back, giving her space, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. "Your mom is amazing, boys. She's always known how to make everything special." The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's heart clench. She busied herself with the stove, trying to maintain her composure. As they sat down to eat, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken words and buried emotions. The boys chattered happily, oblivious to the undercurrent between their parents. "Sebastian," Liam announced between bites, "Tommy from school says his parents got back together after they were apart. He says sometimes people just need time to remember they love each other." The innocent observation landed like a bombshell at the table. Victoria's fork clattered against her plate, and Sebastian's breath caught audibly. "Liam," Victoria started, her voice strained, but Sebastian interrupted gently. "Sometimes things are more complicated than that, buddy. But what's important is that both your mom and I love you boys very much." Victoria looked up, meeting his gaze across the table. The sincerity in his eyes made her chest tight. After dinner, as Sebastian prepared to leave, Victoria found herself following him to the door. The boys had gone upstairs to get ready for bed, leaving them alone for the first time that evening. "Thank you," Sebastian said quietly, "for dinner, for everything." Victoria crossed her arms, protecting herself from the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I'm doing it for them, Sebastian, not for us." "I know." He paused, then added softly, "But Victoria, seeing you with them, seeing how amazing you are as a mother, it makes me realize what a fool I was. Not just for leaving them, but for leaving you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Victoria felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't make this more complicated than it already is." Sebastian nodded, understanding. "Good night, Victoria." As she watched him walk to his car, Victoria pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. The evening had stirred up feelings she'd thought long buried, memories of shared laughter, of quiet moments, of a love she'd once believed would last forever. Upstairs, she heard the boys getting ready for bed, their voices carrying down the hallway. "Mom, can Sebastian come for dinner again tomorrow?" Victoria closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. The path ahead was becoming increasingly complex, and she wasn't sure if her heart could handle the journey. Outside, Sebastian sat in his car, unable to drive away just yet. The warmth of the evening, the familiar comfort of family dinner, the way Victoria's eyes had softened when he praised her, it all felt like a glimpse of what could be, of what he'd thrown away. The autumn night wrapped around the house like a blanket, holding the fragile hopes and fears of a family teetering on the edge of something new. In Millbrook, where second chances were rare and hearts were slow to heal, love was proving to be both the most destructive force and the most powerful remedy. "Mr. Reeves," his CFO's voice crackled through the laptop. "We need a decision on the merger today. The board is getting restless." Sebastian glanced at the clock, 2 hours until he was supposed to pick up the boys. His desk was covered with half-finished volcano models and notes about chemical reactions. "I understand, James, but..." His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Boys super excited about science fair. Don't forget you promised to help them practice their presentation." The weight of his dual responsibilities pressed down on him like a physical force. On his screen, spreadsheets and profit projections demanded his attention. On his desk, a child's handwritten note read, Dad, don't forget the red food coloring for the lava. Dad. The word still sent a jolt through his heart every time. Sebastian. James's voice cut through his thoughts. The Tokyo investors are waiting. Taking a deep breath, Sebastian made his decision. Postpone the call, James. Family emergency. But sir, this merger can wait, Sebastian finished firmly. My sons can't. After ending the call, Sebastian sat back, running his hands through his hair. The old him would have never dreamed of postponing a multi-million-dollar deal. But the old him had also missed the first 4 years of his children's lives. His phone rang. Victoria. Sebastian? Is everything okay? The boys are asking if you're still coming. He could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the unspoken fear that he would disappoint them again. I'm on my way, he assured her. Just had to handle something at work. There was a pause before Victoria spoke again, her voice softer. You know, if this is too much... No, Sebastian interrupted, perhaps too quickly. No, Victoria. Nothing is too much when it comes to them. I'm learning to prioritize what really matters. As he gathered the science fair materials, his phone exploded with urgent emails and messages. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Reeves, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. Sebastian closed his eyes, feeling the familiar pull of his old life. Then he remembered Liam's face lighting up when they'd first tested the volcano prototype. Lucas's proud grin when they'd perfected the chemical reaction. Tell them I'm unavailable until tomorrow, he replied firmly. Family commitments. Driving to Victoria's house, Sebastian reflected on how much his life had changed. The thrill of closing deals had been replaced by something deeper, the joy of seeing his sons achieve even the smallest victories. He arrived to find the boys waiting on the porch, their faces breaking into huge smiles at the sight of his car. Dad! They called out in unison, the word still new and precious between them. Victoria appeared in the doorway, watching as Sebastian helped unload the science fair materials. Her expression softened when she saw how prepared he was, despite his busy schedule. You remembered everything, she remarked quietly. Sebastian met her eyes. I'm not missing any more moments, Victoria. Not one. Inside, as they set up the practice presentation, Sebastian's phone continued to buzz insistently. The boys noticed his occasional glances at the screen. Is your work mad at you? Lucas asked perceptively. Sebastian knelt down to his son's level. Sometimes grown-ups have to make choices about what's most important. And you boys? You're the most important thing in my life now. More important than your big company? Liam asked, his eyes wide. Much more important, Sebastian confirmed, his throat tight with emotion. Victoria, watching from the kitchen doorway, felt her heart twist. This was a different Sebastian from the man who had left 5 years ago. A man who had once chosen conference calls over anniversary dinners, business trips over birthday parties. As the afternoon progressed, Sebastian's phone eventually fell silent. The world of high finance and corporate mergers faded into the background, replaced by the excited chatter of 2 young boys and their perfectly erupting volcano. Later, as Sebastian packed up to leave, Victoria touched his arm lightly. You're doing good, you know? With them. The simple praise meant more to him than any business accolade ever had. I'm trying, he replied softly. They make it easy to choose what matters. Driving home that evening, Sebastian realized that success had taken on a new meaning. It wasn't measured in stock prices or profit margins anymore, but in the smiles of his sons and the growing trust in Victoria's eyes. His phone lit up with another urgent message from the office. But this time, Sebastian didn't even glance at it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in balancing his 2 worlds. But for now, he was exactly where he needed to be, learning to be the father his sons deserved, one science fair volcano at a time. Sebastian, his board chairman's voice was grave. We need you in Tokyo. Immediately. The Nakamura deal is falling apart. Sebastian's heart sank. The Nakamura deal was the cornerstone of his company's expansion into Asia. His failure could mean financial ruin for thousands of employees. How soon? He asked, his voice tight. The jet is fueled and waiting. We need you there by tomorrow. Sebastian glanced at the calendar on his fridge, covered in colorful reminders of school events and visitation days. His eyes landed on a particularly important note. Boys' first school play Friday. I can't, Richard. My sons have their school play on Friday. I promised I'd be there. The silence on the other end was deafening. Sebastian, Richard finally said, his tone a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. This is a multi-billion-dollar deal. Surely you can miss one school event. The old Sebastian would have agreed without hesitation. But as he looked at the twin lunchboxes he had carefully packed, each with a little note inside, he knew he couldn't go back to being that man. I'm sorry, Richard. I can't miss this. It's too important. More important than the company you built? Than the livelihoods of thousands of employees. Sebastian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision. I'll work remotely, set up video conferences, whatever it takes, but I'm not missing that play. After ending the call, Sebastian leaned against the kitchen counter, his mind racing. He had just potentially jeopardized everything he had built over the past decade. But the thought of disappointing Lucas and Liam again was unbearable. Later that afternoon, as he picked up the boys from school, Sebastian's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with urgent messages. Dad, are you okay? Lucas asked, noticing Sebastian's distracted expression. Sebastian forced a smile. Just some work stuff, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about. But as they arrived home, Victoria was waiting on the porch, her face tense. Sebastian, can we talk for a moment? The boys ran inside, leaving Sebastian and Victoria alone. Your assistant called me, Victoria began, her voice carefully neutral. She said you're refusing to go to Tokyo for a crucial business deal. Sebastian sighed, running a hand through his hair. Victoria, I can't miss their play. I promised them. Victoria's expression softened slightly. I know, and I appreciate that. But Sebastian, is this sustainable? Are you really prepared to risk everything you've built? I'm trying to find a balance, Sebastian replied, his voice strained. I can't be the man I was before, always choosing work over family. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. And what happens when the company you've neglected can no longer support the life you want to provide for the boys? Have you thought about that? The question hit Sebastian hard. He hadn't allowed himself to consider the long-term consequences of his choices. I don't know, he admitted softly. I just know I can't let them down again. Victoria's expression was a mixture of concern and something else. A grudging respect, perhaps. You need to find a way to do both, Sebastian. For their sake. As if on cue, Liam's voice called from inside. Dad, can you help me practice my lines? Sebastian looked at Victoria, his eyes pleading for understanding. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Go, be their dad. But Sebastian, find a way to be everything else too. They need that just as much. As Sebastian walked into the house, his phone buzzed again with another urgent message from Tokyo. He silenced it, focusing instead on Liam's excited chatter about the play. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Sebastian sat in his home office, surrounded by financial reports and script pages. He was determined to find a way to make it all work, to be the father his sons needed and the business leader his company depended on. As the clock ticked past midnight, Sebastian's eyes landed on a framed photo of Lucas and Liam, their smiles bright and trusting. Next to it sat a model of the Tokyo skyline, a gift from a business partner. Two worlds equally important, both demanding his full attention. Sebastian took a deep breath, picked up his phone, and dialed Richard's number. I have a proposal, he said as soon as Richard answered. One that will save the deal and get me back in time for my son's play. As Sebastian outlined his plan, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was his new challenge, not just balancing work and family, but integrating them into a life that honored both parts of himself. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with late nights and early mornings, video conferences squeezed between soccer practices, and business trips carefully planned around school events. But as Sebastian looked at the photo of his sons once more, He knew it was a challenge he was ready to face. In Millbrook, as the autumn night deepened, a father worked tirelessly to bridge two worlds, driven by love for his children and a determination to redefine success on his own terms. However, life had a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon, and Sebastian was at the local park with the boys, teaching them how to fly kites. The air was filled with laughter and the colorful swoops of their kites dancing in the autumn breeze. "Dad, look, I'm doing it!" Liam shouted gleefully as his kite soared higher. Sebastian beamed with pride, his heart swelling with a joy he never knew existed before reconnecting with his sons. "That's amazing, buddy. You're a natural." As Lucas ran over to join them, Sebastian's eyes drifted across the park, and suddenly, his world tilted on its axis. There, walking hand in hand with a tall, handsome stranger, was Victoria. Her face was lit up with a smile he hadn't seen in years, her laughter carrying across the park. Sebastian felt as though he'd been punched in the gut. Of course, he knew Victoria had every right to move on, to find happiness. But seeing it in front of him, with their children just feet away, was more painful than he'd anticipated. "Dad, are you okay?" Lucas tugged at his sleeve, noticing the change in his demeanor. Sebastian forced a smile. "Of course, buddy. Just got distracted for a second. Here, let me help you with your kite." As he helped Lucas untangle his kite strings, Sebastian couldn't help but glance back at Victoria and her companion. They were sitting on a bench now, talking animatedly. The man's arm was draped casually over Victoria's shoulders, and Sebastian felt a pang of longing for the life he'd thrown away. Suddenly, Liam's voice cut through his thoughts. "Mom! Mom! Look at my kite!" Sebastian's heart raced as Victoria looked up, her eyes meeting his across the park. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, she was walking towards them, her new friend in tow. "Boys, I didn't expect to see you here," Victoria said, her voice slightly strained. She turned to Sebastian, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Sebastian, hi." "Victoria," he managed, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nice day for kite flying." An awkward silence fell over the group until Victoria's companion stepped forward, extending his hand. "You must be Sebastian. I'm Daniel. I've heard a lot about you from Victoria and the boys." Sebastian shook his hand, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." The boys, oblivious to the tension, began chattering excitedly about their kites and asking if Daniel wanted to try. As they ran off to show him, Victoria and Sebastian were left alone. "So," Sebastian began, unsure of what to say. "Daniel seems nice." Victoria nodded, her eyes following the boys. "He is. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. He's a pediatrician at the local hospital." Sebastian felt a twinge of inadequacy. A pediatrician, someone who understood children, who could be there for the boys in ways he was still learning. "The boys seem to like him," Sebastian observed, trying to keep the hurt out of his voice. Victoria turned to him, her expression softening. "Sebastian, But before she could finish, Liam came running back, his eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, Daniel says he can teach us how to make our own kites. Can we? Please?" Sebastian looked from Liam's hopeful face to Daniel, who was now helping Lucas with his kite. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions: jealousy, sadness, and a fierce desire to be the one his sons looked up to. "Sure, buddy," he managed, ruffling Liam's hair. "That sounds like fun." As they walked back to join the others, Victoria touched Sebastian's arm lightly. "I was going to tell you," she said softly. "I just wasn't sure how." Sebastian nodded, swallowing hard. "It's okay, Victoria. You deserve to be happy. The boys deserve stability." For a moment, they stood there, the weight of their shared history and the uncertainty of their future hanging between them. Then Liam called out again, breaking the spell. "Dad, come on. Daniel's going to show us how to make a dragon kite." As Sebastian walked towards his sons and the man who was becoming a part of their lives, he felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. He was happy for Victoria, truly. but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching another man step into the role he'd abandoned years ago. The autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park. Sebastian watched as his sons laughed with Daniel, their faces alight with joy. He knew he had to find a way to accept this new dynamic, for the sake of Lucas and Liam. But as the kites soared higher in the dimming sky, Sebastian couldn't help but wonder if he was watching his chance at a reunited family fly away with them. In Millbrook, where second chances were rare and hearts healed slowly, Sebastian faced his toughest challenge yet, learning to co-parent not just with Victoria, but with the man who might become a permanent part of his children's lives. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The love for his sons would guide him through whatever storms lay ahead. It was a chilly Tuesday evening when Sebastian's phone rang. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, unusual for this time of night. His heart raced as he answered. "Victoria? Is everything okay?" Her voice was strained, tinged with worry. "Sebastian, I need your help. Liam's sick. He's running a high fever, and I can't reach Daniel. He's on call at the hospital tonight." Sebastian was already grabbing his keys. "I'm on my way. Have you given him any medication?" "Yes, but it's not bringing the fever down. I'm scared." "Sebastian." The vulnerability in her voice tugged at his heart. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just stay calm." The drive to Victoria's house was a blur of worried thoughts and memories. He remembered the first time Lucas had gotten sick as a baby, how terrified they'd both been. Now, he was racing to help with a son he was only beginning to know. When he arrived, Victoria met him at the door, her face pale with worry. "He's upstairs. I've never seen him like this." Sebastian followed her to Liam's room, where the boy lay curled up in bed, his face flushed with fever. Lucas sat nearby, his young face creased with concern for his twin. "Hey, buddy," Sebastian said softly, kneeling by the bed. "Not feeling so great, huh?" Liam's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. "Dad? You came." The simple statement hit Sebastian like a punch to the gut. "Of course I came. I'll always come when you need me." He turned to Victoria. "We should take him to the hospital. This fever's too high." She nodded, already moving to gather what they needed. Sebastian gently lifted Liam into his arms, the boy's heat radiating through his pajamas. "Lucas, grab your coat," Victoria instructed. "We're all going." The drive to the hospital was tense, filled with Liam's whimpers and Lucas's quiet questions. Sebastian found himself reaching back to hold Liam's hand, murmuring reassurances. In the emergency room, time seemed to stretch endlessly. Tests were run, doctors consulted, and through it all, Sebastian and Victoria sat side by side, united in their worry for their son. "I should have noticed earlier," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with guilt. "I was distracted with work, and—" "Hey!" Sebastian interrupted gently, surprising himself by taking her hand. "You're an amazing mother. You did everything right. He's going to be okay." Victoria looked at their joined hands, then up at Sebastian's face. For a moment, the years seemed to fall away, and they were just two people who loved each other, worried about their child. The moment was broken by the arrival of Daniel, still in his hospital scrubs. "Victoria, I just got your messages. I came as soon as I could." He paused, taking in the scene before him, Sebastian and Victoria's clasped hands. Lucas curled up asleep in a chair. Sebastian quickly let go of Victoria's hand, standing up. "Daniel, good you're here. They're running some more tests on Liam now." An awkward silence fell over the group, broken only by Lucas stirring in his sleep. Daniel moved to Victoria's side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'll go check on his test results. Don't worry, we'll figure this out." As Daniel walked away, Sebastian felt a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude for the doctor's expertise, jealousy at his easy comfort with Victoria, and an overwhelming sense of being an outsider in his own family's crisis. Hours passed, filled with tense waiting and hushed conversations. Finally, a diagnosis was made: a severe case of flu, complicated by Liam's asthma, which Sebastian hadn't even known about. As dawn broke, Liam's fever finally began to subside. Sebastian stood by the hospital bed, watching his son's peaceful sleep, when Victoria joined him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for knowing what to do." Sebastian turned to her, his eyes filled with a mix of love and regret. "I should have always been here, for both of them, for you." Victoria's expression softened. "Sebastian." But before she could continue, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Good news. We can take Liam home later today. He'll need rest and close monitoring, but he's going to be fine." The relief in the room was palpable. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sebastian watched Victoria and Daniel talking quietly, their easy familiarity evident. He felt a renewed determination stirring within him. Yes, he had missed years of his sons' lives. Yes, Victoria had moved on. But this night had shown him that he was still an essential part of this family. As they walked out into the crisp morning air, Liam safely nestled in Sebastian's arms and Lucas holding Victoria's hand. Sebastian made a silent vow. He would continue to fight for his place in their lives, not just as a weekend dad or a financial provider, but as a true partner in raising their sons. The road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with the complexities of co-parenting and evolving relationships. But as the sun rose over Millbrook, casting a golden glow on the hospital parking lot, Sebastian felt a glimmer of hope. This night had changed something, reforged a connection he thought was lost forever. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them for Lucas, for Liam, and for the family he was determined to rebuild, one day at a time. One crisp Saturday morning, as Sebastian arrived to pick up the boys for their weekend together, he was met with an unexpected scene. Victoria was pacing in the living room, her face etched with worry, while Daniel sat on the couch, his expression grim. "What's going on?" Sebastian asked, his heart rate quickening at the palpable tension in the room. Victoria turned to him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "It's my mom. She's had a fall. They're not sure how bad it is, but she's in the hospital in Chicago." Sebastian's concern was immediate and genuine. He had always been fond of Victoria's mother, even after the separation. "Is there anything I can do?" Daniel stood up, placing a comforting hand on Victoria's shoulder. "I've offered to go with her to Chicago, but she's worried about the boys." Sebastian felt a surge of conflicting emotions, concern for Victoria's mother, a desire to support Victoria, and an irrational twinge of jealousy at Daniel's easy familiarity. Before he could respond, Lucas and Liam came bounding down the stairs, their excitement for the weekend evident on their faces. They stopped short, sensing the tension in the room. "Mom," Liam asked, his voice small. "What's wrong?" Victoria knelt down, pulling both boys into a hug. "Grandma's not feeling well, sweethearts. I need to go see her for a few days." Lucas's brow furrowed. "But what about us? Who will stay with us?" Sebastian stepped forward, his decision made in that instant. "I will. I'll stay here with you boys while your mom is away." All eyes in the room turned to him, Victoria's filled with surprise and gratitude, Daniel's with a mix of relief and something unreadable, and the boys with excitement. "Really, Dad?" Liam exclaimed. "You'll stay here?" Sebastian nodded, meeting Victoria's gaze. "Of course, for as long as you need." Victoria stood, wiping away a tear. "Sebastian, are you sure? What about work?" "Work can wait," he said firmly. "Family comes first. Always." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity, Victoria and Daniel rushing to pack and make travel arrangements, while Sebastian helped the boys understand what was happening. As Victoria prepared to leave, she pulled Sebastian aside. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "It means more than you know." Sebastian felt a lump in his throat. "Just take care of your mom. We'll be fine here." As they watched Victoria and Daniel drive away, Sebastian felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a weekend visit. This was full-time parenting, something he had missed out on for years. "So," he said, turning to the boys with a smile he hoped looked more confident than he felt. "What should we do first?" The days that followed were a crash course in single parenting for Sebastian. He juggled work calls with school runs, learned to navigate the intricacies of the boys' schedules, and discovered the challenges of maintaining a household. One evening, as he struggled to help Lucas with his math homework while simultaneously trying to cook dinner, his phone rang. It was Victoria. "How are things going?" she asked, her voice tired but warm. Sebastian glanced around at the chaos of the kitchen, flour dusting every surface, a pot threatening to boil over, and Lucas frowning at his textbook. "Everything's great," he lied, not wanting to worry her. "How's your mom?" "She's doing better," Victoria sighed. "But the doctors want to keep her for a few more days." "Sebastian, if this is too much—" "It's not," he interrupted, surprising himself with his conviction. "We're managing. The boys are. They're amazing, Victoria. I'm learning so much about them." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I always knew you could do this, you know? Be a real father." Sebastian felt his throat tighten. "I'm trying. I wish I hadn't wasted so much time." "Dad!" Liam's voice called from the living room. "The TV's doing that weird thing again." Sebastian chuckled. "Duty calls. Give your mom our love. Okay?" As he hung up, Sebastian was struck by the realization that the chaos, the challenges, the constant demands, was what he had been missing all along. This was what really mattered. Later that night, as he tucked the boys into bed, Lucas looked up at him with serious eyes. "Dad, are you going to leave again when Mom comes back?" The question hit Sebastian like a physical blow. He sat on the edge of the bed, his heart heavy. "No, buddy, I'm not going anywhere. I promise." As he turned out the light and closed the door, Sebastian leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the enormity of that promise. He knew that keeping it would mean reevaluating everything, his work, his living situation, his entire life. But as he looked around the house, filled with evidence of the life Victoria had built for their sons, Sebastian felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in years. This was where he belonged. This was home. The path ahead was still uncertain. Victoria's relationship with Daniel, the logistics of co-parenting, the challenges of reintegrating into a family he had once abandoned, all of these were hurdles yet to be faced. But as Sebastian settled onto the couch, surrounded by toys and schoolbooks, he felt a sense of peace. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. For Lucas, for Liam, for the family he was determined to be a part of, not just in name, but in every way that mattered. In Millbrook, where second chances were rare and hard-earned, Sebastian was finally learning the true meaning of fatherhood, one day at a time. On the morning of Victoria's arrival, Sebastian woke early, determined to have the house in perfect order. As he moved through the rooms, picking up stray toys and straightening cushions, he couldn't help but feel like he was preparing for some sort of evaluation. "Dad!" Lucas's sleepy voice called from the top of the stairs. "Is Mom coming home today?" Sebastian paused, a pile of laundry in his arms. "Yeah, buddy. She'll be here this afternoon." "Excited?" Lucas nodded, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. Will you still be here too?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sebastian set down the laundry and climbed the stairs, kneeling to meet his son's gaze. "Lucas, remember what I promised? I'm not going anywhere. Things might be a little different, but I'll always be here for you and Liam." Lucas threw his arms around Sebastian's neck, hugging him tightly. Over his son's shoulder, Sebastian caught sight of Liam peeking out from his bedroom, a similar mix of hope and worry on his face. The day passed in a flurry of activity. Sebastian helped the boys make a welcome home banner, cooked Victoria's favorite meal, and tried to quell the nervous energy that seemed to vibrate through the house. As the afternoon wore on, Sebastian found himself standing in the kitchen, lost in thought. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the front door open or the excited shouts of the boys greeting their mother. "Sebastian!" He turned to find Victoria standing in the doorway, looking tired but happy. The sight of her, back in the home they had once shared, sent a jolt through his heart. "Victoria!" he managed, suddenly unsure of himself. "Welcome home. How's your mother?" "She's doing much better, thank you." Victoria's eyes roamed the kitchen, taking in the evidence of the past week, drawings on the fridge, a new chore chart, the smell of a home-cooked meal. "It looks like you've been busy." Sebastian rubbed the back of his neck, feeling strangely vulnerable. "We managed. The boys were great." There was a moment of awkward silence, broken only by the sound of the boys chattering excitedly in the living room. Then Victoria stepped closer, her expression softening. "Sebastian, I want to thank you for stepping up like this. It means more than you know." He met her gaze, seeing a warmth there that he hadn't seen in years. "Victoria, But before he could continue, Daniel appeared in the doorway, carrying Victoria's bags. "Everything's inside now," he said, his eyes darting between Sebastian and Victoria. "I should probably get going. Let you all get settled." The moment shattered, reality rushing back in. Sebastian stepped back, nodding to Daniel. "Of course. Thanks for everything." As Daniel said his goodbyes, Sebastian felt a familiar pang of jealousy, tempered now by a new understanding of the complexities of their situation. Later that evening, after the boys were in bed, Sebastian found himself lingering, reluctant to leave. Victoria joined him on the porch, 2 steaming mugs of tea in her hands. "It's been quite a week, hasn't it?" she said, handing him a mug. Sebastian nodded, looking out at the quiet street. "Victoria, I don't want to go back to how things were before. This past week, being here full-time with the boys, it's made me realize what I've been missing." Victoria was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "And what about your work? Your life in the city?" "None of that matters if I'm not here for them. For you." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, a mix of emotions flashing across her face. "Sebastian, I know," he said quickly. "I know it's complicated, with Daniel and our history and everything else, but I want to try to really be a part of this family, in whatever way I can." Victoria was silent for a long moment, the weight of their shared history and uncertain future hanging between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "It won't be easy. We have a lot to work through, a lot of trust to rebuild." Sebastian nodded, hope blooming in his chest. "I know, but I'm ready to do whatever it takes." As they stood there on the porch, the cool night air wrapping around them, Sebastian felt a shift. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation or a fairy tale ending, but something more real, more profound, the first tentative steps toward a new kind of family. In the quiet Millbrook night, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and shared memories, Sebastian and Victoria began to imagine a future neither of them had dared to hope for. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and difficult conversations. But for the first time in years, they were facing it together, united by their love for their sons and the fragile hope of second chances. As Sebastian finally said goodnight and walked to his car, he felt a sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded him for so long. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it, not as the man who had walked away, but as the father and partner he was determined to become. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sebastian arrived at Victoria's house to pick up the boys for their weekend together. As he approached the front door, he heard raised voices from inside. His heart sank as he recognized the voices of Victoria and Daniel. "I just don't understand why he needs to be here all the time." Daniel's voice carried through the door, frustration evident in his tone. "He's their father, Daniel," Victoria replied, her voice strained. "We're trying to make this work for the boys." Sebastian hesitated, his hand poised to knock. He knew he shouldn't eavesdrop, but he couldn't bring himself to interrupt. Daniel's voice softened, tinged with hurt. "And where does that leave us, Victoria? I feel like I'm competing with a ghost." There was a long pause before Victoria spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Daniel. I need time to figure this out." Unable to listen any longer, Sebastian knocked on the door. The sudden silence from inside was deafening. After a moment, Victoria opened the door, her face flushed and eyes slightly red. "Sebastian," she said, forcing a smile. "Come in. The boys are just finishing packing." As he stepped inside, Sebastian nodded awkwardly to Daniel, who was standing in the living room, his posture tense. The air was thick with unspoken words and conflicting emotions. Before anyone could break the uncomfortable silence, Lucas and Liam came bounding down the stairs, their weekend bags in tow. "Dad!" Liam exclaimed, throwing his arms around Sebastian's waist. "Can we go to the new science museum this weekend?" Sebastian ruffled Liam's hair, grateful for the distraction. "Sure, buddy. That sounds like a great idea." As the boys said goodbye to their mother and Daniel, Sebastian couldn't help but notice the way Victoria's eyes lingered on him, a mix of confusion and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Once in the car, Lucas piped up from the back seat. "Dad, are you and Mom getting back together?" The question caught Sebastian off guard, causing him to swerve slightly. "What makes you ask that, buddy?" Lucas shrugged. "You're around a lot more now, and sometimes I hear Mom talking to Aunt Sarah about being confused." Sebastian's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing both boys watching him expectantly. "It's complicated, guys. Your mom and I care about you both very much, and we're trying to figure out the best way to be a family. But that doesn't always mean being together like we used to be." Liam's small voice chimed in. "What about Daniel? Is he going to be our new dad?" The innocent question felt like a knife to Sebastian's heart. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Daniel cares about you boys and your mom, but no one's trying to replace anyone. Okay? You have a dad, me, and that's never going to change." As they drove through the streets of Millbrook, Sebastian's mind raced. He had been so focused on rebuilding his relationship with his sons that he hadn't fully considered the impact on Victoria's life, on her relationship with Daniel. Later that evening, after the boys were asleep in their rooms at Sebastian's house, he found himself sitting on the back porch, staring up at the stars. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Can we talk tomorrow? After you drop the boys off?" Sebastian's heart raced as he typed his reply. "Of course. Everything okay?" The response came quickly. "Just need to figure some things out. For all of us." As he sat there in the cool night air, Sebastian felt a mix of hope and fear. He had been given a second chance with his sons, a chance to be the father he should have been from the beginning. But what about Victoria? Did he dare hope for a second chance there as well? The sound of a car door slamming nearby jolted Sebastian from his thoughts. He looked up to see Daniel walking down the sidewalk, hands shoved in his pockets, looking lost in thought. For a moment, their eyes met across the darkened street. Daniel nodded curtly, then continued on his way. In that brief exchange, Sebastian saw a reflection of his own struggles, a man trying to find his place in a family dynamic that was constantly shifting. He felt an unexpected pang of empathy for Daniel, even as he grappled with his own conflicting emotions. As the night deepened around him, Sebastian realized that the path forward was far from clear. The conversation with Victoria tomorrow loomed large in his mind, filled with possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. Whatever happened, he knew that the decisions made would shape not just his future, but the futures of Lucas, Liam, Victoria, and even Daniel. In Millbrook, where second chances were rare and hearts healed slowly, Sebastian found himself at another crossroads. As he finally stood to go inside, he made a silent promise to himself and to his sleeping sons. No matter what happened tomorrow or in the days to come, he would face it with honesty, courage, and an unwavering commitment to being the best father he could be. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of change and the promise of new beginnings. In the quiet of the night, a family on the brink of redefinition slept, unaware of the pivotal conversations and decisions that awaited them in the light of a new day. Pulling into the driveway, Sebastian's heart skipped a beat when he saw Victoria waiting on the porch. She looked tired, as if she'd spent the night tossing and turning, much like he had. "Mom!" the boys cried in unison, tumbling out of the car and racing towards her. Victoria hugged them tightly, her eyes meeting Sebastian's over their heads. Did you have a good time with your dad? As the boys regaled her with tales of their weekend adventures, Sebastian hung back, uncertainty rooting him to the spot. Finally, Victoria gently ushered the boys inside. Why don't you go unpack? I need to talk to your father for a bit. Once the boys were inside, an awkward silence fell between them. Sebastian cleared his throat. Victoria, not here, she interrupted softly, glancing towards the house. Let's walk. They set off down the quiet street, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. For a while, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. Sebastian, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about the boys, about everything. Sebastian's heart raced. And Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of emotions. Uncertainty, fear, and something else that made Sebastian's breath catch. I ended things with Daniel last night, she said quietly. Sebastian felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Victoria, I'm sorry. I know how much he meant to you. She shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. That's just it, Sebastian. I thought I knew what I wanted, what was best for me and the boys. But these past few months, seeing you with Lucas and Liam, watching you become the father I always knew you could be, it's made me question everything. Sebastian's mind whirled. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but he held back, sensing there was more. But Sebastian, Victoria continued, her voice trembling slightly, I'm scared, terrified actually. You hurt me, so deeply before. How can I trust that it won't happen again? The pain in her voice cut through Sebastian like a knife. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Victoria, I know I can never undo the hurt I caused, but I swear to you on everything I hold dear that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Not just for the boys, but for you. If you'll let me. Tears glistened in Victoria's eyes. And what about your work? Your life in the city? Can you really give all that up? Sebastian stepped closer, his voice low and intense. None of that matters without you and the boys. I've learned what truly matters in life, and it's right here in Millbrook. It's Lucas and Liam. It's you, Victoria. It's always been you. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The autumn breeze rustled the leaves around them, the world holding its breath. Then, slowly, Victoria reached out and took Sebastian's hand. I can't promise anything, she whispered. We have so much to work through, but I want to try. For the boys. For us. Sebastian felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. He squeezed Victoria's hand, unable to find words to express the magnitude of what he was feeling. As they stood there, hands clasped, the sound of running feet broke the moment. They turned to see Lucas and Liam racing towards them, faces alight with excitement. Mom! Dad! Liam called out. Are you holding hands? Lucas, ever the observant one, looked between them with hope shining in his eyes. Does this mean you're getting back together? Sebastian and Victoria exchanged a glance, years of shared history and future possibilities passing between them in an instant. Victoria knelt down, pulling the boys close. It means we're going to try to be a family again. All of us. Together. The boys erupted in cheers, throwing their arms around both parents. As Sebastian held his family, truly held them for the first time in years, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. But even in this moment of joy, he knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were wounds to heal, trust to rebuild, and a lifetime of moments to make up for. The specter of his past mistakes still loomed, a reminder of how fragile this newfound happiness could be. As they walked back to the house, the boys running ahead, Sebastian and Victoria's hands remained intertwined. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges they had yet to face. But for now, in the golden light of an autumn afternoon in Millbrook, hope blossomed anew. The story of Sebastian, Victoria, Lucas, and Liam was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. A story of redemption, of second chances, and of a family finding its way back to each other, one day at a time. In Millbrook, where miracles were rare and forgiveness hard-earned, love was proving to be the most powerful force of all, capable of healing old wounds and writing new chapters in a story that was still unfolding. One chilly Saturday morning, as Sebastian helped Victoria prepare breakfast, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Lucas raced to answer it with Liam close behind. "Dad," Lucas called out, his voice tinged with confusion. "There's a man here to see you. He says he's from your company." Sebastian and Victoria exchanged worried glances. He hadn't told his team in New York about his decision to stay in Millbrook permanently. This moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than he'd anticipated. As Sebastian walked to the door, he felt Victoria's reassuring hand on his arm. "We'll face this together," she whispered. In the doorway stood James, Sebastian's CFO, looking decidedly out of place in his expensive suit amidst the cozy domesticity of the house. "James," Sebastian greeted him, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is unexpected." James's eyes darted between Sebastian, Victoria, and the curious faces of Lucas and Liam peeking around the corner. "Sebastian, we need to talk. The board is in uproar. You've missed crucial meetings. Deals are falling through. What's going on?" Victoria stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Why don't you come in, James? We can discuss this over coffee." As they settled in the living room, the tension was palpable. Sebastian took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. "James, I know I owe you and the company an explanation. The truth is, I've decided to step back from my role in New York. My family, they need me here." James's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Step back? Sebastian, you built this company from the ground up. You're walking away from everything you've worked for." Sebastian felt Victoria's hand slip into his, giving him strength. "No, James. I'm walking towards everything that really matters." Liam's small voice piped up from the doorway where he and Lucas were eavesdropping. "Is Dad in trouble?" All eyes turned to the boys, and Sebastian felt a surge of protectiveness. He motioned for them to come closer. "No, buddy. I'm not in trouble. I'm just explaining to Mr. James why being here with you, your brother, and your mom is so important to me." James watched the interaction, his expression softening slightly. "Sebastian, I understand the pull of family, but surely we can find a compromise. The company needs you." Victoria spoke up, her voice gentle but resolute. "And we need him, James, more than you can imagine." Sebastian looked at his family, Victoria's supportive gaze, Lucas's worried frown, Liam's hopeful eyes, and felt a clarity he'd never experienced in the boardroom. "James, I'm not abandoning the company. I'll still consult, join video conferences when needed. But my priority now is right here. I've missed too much already. I won't miss any more." A heavy silence fell over the room. James stood up, straightening his jacket. "I see. Well, I'll have to report this to the board. They won't be happy, Sebastian." As James prepared to leave, Lucas suddenly spoke up. "Mr. James? My dad's really good at being a dad now. I think that's more important than any company." The simple, honest statement seemed to hit James hard. He looked at Sebastian, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "Perhaps you're right, young man. Sebastian, we'll figure something out. Take care." After James left, the family stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just transpired settling around them. Then Victoria pulled Sebastian into a tight embrace, the boys quickly joining in. "Are you okay?" she whispered against his chest. Sebastian held his family close, feeling a mix of emotions, fear for the uncertain future, sadness for the chapter of his life that was closing, but overwhelming love and certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. "I'm more than okay," he replied softly. "I'm home." As they broke apart, Liam tugged on Sebastian's sleeve. "Dad, does this mean you'll be here all the time now?" Sebastian knelt down to his son's level, his heart full. "That's right, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." The joy on the boys' faces was all the confirmation Sebastian needed that he'd made the right choice. As they moved to the kitchen to finish preparing breakfast, Now a family of 4 working in comfortable synchronicity. Sebastian caught Victoria's eye across the room. The look they shared was full of promise, of challenges yet to face, of a love rekindled and strengthened by adversity. In that moment, Sebastian knew that whatever the future held, whether it was board meetings via video call or school science fairs, corporate restructuring or family game nights, they would face it together. In Millbrook, where second chances bloomed like the resilient flowers of spring after a harsh winter, a family once fractured was growing stronger by the day. The road ahead was uncertain, but for Sebastian, Victoria, Lucas, and Liam, it was a road they would walk side by side, hand in hand, their bonds forged anew in the crucible of forgiveness, love, and the enduring power of family. One frosty December evening, as snowflakes danced outside the windows, Victoria found Sebastian in his study, poring over financial reports. The crease between his brows and the tension in his shoulders told her all she needed to know. "Tough day?" she asked softly, placing a steaming mug of coffee on his desk. Sebastian looked up, his eyes tired but warm. "Just trying to balance everything. The New York office is pushing back on some of my remote work proposals." Victoria perched on the edge of the desk, her hand finding his. "You know, you don't have to prove anything to us. The boys and I, we understand if you need to." "No," Sebastian interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm not going back to how things were. I promised you. I promised them." The determination in his eyes made Victoria's heart swell, but she couldn't shake the nagging worry. "I just don't want you to resent us someday for holding you back." Sebastian stood, pulling Victoria into his arms. "You're not holding me back. You're showing me what really matters." Their moment was interrupted by a commotion from downstairs, followed by Liam's panicked voice. "Mom! Dad! Come quick! Lucas is hurt." They raced down the stairs to find Lucas sprawled at the bottom, clutching his arm, tears streaming down his face. Liam hovered nearby, looking terrified. "What happened?" Victoria asked, kneeling beside Lucas. We were trying to slide down the banister," Liam admitted, his voice small. "I dared him to do it." Sebastian felt a flash of anger, quickly replaced by concern. He knelt down, gently examining Lucas's arm. "It might be broken. We need to get him to the hospital." As they rushed to the car, bundling the boys in warm coats, Sebastian couldn't help but think of all the moments like this he had missed. The scrapes, the fears, the middle-of-the-night fevers. He had a lot of catching up to do. In the emergency room, as they waited for X-ray results, Lucas looked up at Sebastian with tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know you told us not to play on the stairs." Sebastian's heart clenched. He pulled Lucas close, mindful of his injured arm. "It's okay, buddy. Accidents happen. I'm just glad I'm here now." Victoria, who had been talking to the doctor, returned with a relieved smile. "It's just a sprain. No break." As the doctor wrapped Lucas's arm, Liam tugged on Sebastian's sleeve. "Dad, are you mad at us?" Sebastian knelt down to Liam's level, seeing the guilt in his young eyes. "No, buddy, I'm not mad, but you both need to be more careful, okay? Your mom and we couldn't bear it if anything happened to you." The drive home was quiet, the boys subdued by the evening's events. As Victoria helped Lucas up to bed, Sebastian found himself standing in the doorway of the boys' room, watching them settle in for the night. "Dad," Lucas called out softly, "will you stay with us for a bit?" Sebastian's throat tightened with emotion. "Of course, buddy." He settled onto the edge of Lucas's bed, with Liam quickly curling up beside him. As he began to tell them a story, one his own father had told him long ago, Sebastian felt a profound sense of rightness wash over him. Later, as he and Victoria prepared for bed, she noticed the contemplative look on his face. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Sebastian turned to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I can't believe how close I came to missing all of this. The good and the bad. The scraped knees and the bedtime stories. I don't ever want to take it for granted again." Victoria wrapped her arms around him, her voice soft but fierce. "Then don't. Be here, Sebastian. fully and completely. That's all any of us have ever wanted. As they held each other in the quiet of their bedroom, the sound of the boys' soft breathing drifting from down the hall, Sebastian made a silent vow. He would face whatever challenges came their way, whether from his company, their past, or the unpredictable nature of family life, with unwavering commitment. In Millbrook, where winter's chill was no match for the warmth of a healing family, Sebastian and Victoria stood on the precipice of a new chapter. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with the everyday trials of parenthood and the lingering echoes of past mistakes. But as the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in quiet possibility, they faced the future together, not as perfect parents or a flawless couple, but as a family bound by love, forgiveness, and the precious gift of second chances. The night deepened, and with it, the sense that this reunited family was not just healing, but growing stronger with each passing day, each shared laugh, each overcome obstacle. In the heart of Millbrook, a once broken home was becoming whole again, one moment at a time. Sebastian Reeves? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar and formal. "Speaking," Sebastian replied, a sense of unease creeping over him. "This is Charles Drummond from the New York office. The board has called an emergency meeting. Your presence is required in person. It's about the future of the company." Sebastian's heart sank. He had known this day might come, but he had hoped for more time. "When?" he asked, his voice tight. "Tomorrow morning. A car will pick you up at 6 a.m. As Sebastian hung up the phone, he turned to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her face pale. She had heard enough to understand the gravity of the situation. "You have to go, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sebastian nodded, moving to embrace her. "It's just for a day or two. I'll be back before you know it." But even as he said the words, a cold fear gripped his heart. What if the board forced him to choose between his family and the company he had built from the ground up? That evening, as they broke the news to the boys over dinner, Lucas's fork clattered to his plate. "But you said you wouldn't leave again," he cried, his eyes filling with tears. Liam, always more reserved, simply stared at his plate, pushing his food around silently. Sebastian felt as though his heart was being torn in two. He knelt between his son's chairs, taking their hands in his. "Listen to me, both of you. I'm not